Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video as we continue taking a deep look into off-season previews for specific teams. Of course, this video focused on the Memphis Grizzlies. If you are new to the channel, specifically you Grizzlies fans, make sure to leave a like on today's video, subscribe to the channel, and also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on any more of the content here, as there are daily uploads throughout the duration of the draft process and the offseason process here. And this video is very, very requested on the channel, so make sure you guys leave a comment down below for what video you'd like to see next, whether that's a Grizz or some other team for an offseason preview like this Grizzlies offseason preview, or perhaps you'd like to see some other type of video. Just go ahead, leave a comment down below. That'd be greatly appreciated. And let's jump into it here now with a video preview. We're going to look at the season recap. That's the best place to start. Then following that, we're going to see Memphis's draft situation, what picks they have this year, what picks they have in the future. I think that that's a very important topic of discussion here for Memphis this offseason. And then afterward, we'll look at guys they could potentially target with those picks. And then also the free agency situation, guys that they could potentially lose through free agency, guys that they would maybe look to add to their core already. And then also with those potential free agent targets, I also have included trade targets, something I haven't done as much of in some of these other offseason previews. I think Memphis's route to improving this team is a lot clearer through the trade market than it is through free agency, although there are options out there for them to do so. So we're actually going to have the best of both worlds, where we get to talk about not only the draft and free agency, we're also going to look at the trade block and talk about some players that I could see being good fits. There's only a couple in this video. We are going to have some more specific trade videos a little bit later on in the draft process here as well. Specifically after the lottery, there's going to be a lot of trade videos coming out on the channel, but I wanted to tease that a little bit here with a potential trade target or two for Memphis. And then we'll look at an early outlook for next season. Of course, very, very early on, right? But I have a good feeling on where this Grizzlies team is going to be, and we'll see if they can take a step forward going in to next season via some transactions this offseason. So let's take a look back at this past season, which I think a lot of people would probably label as a disappointment, specifically with some of the comments by star point guard Ja Morant, someone I'm a really big fan of. So Grizzlies fans, what I'm about to say is not hate at all. I really, really like this guy's game. 100% without a doubt, one of my favorite players to watch in the league. But when you do sit down in an interview and you say, nah, I'm fine in the West, and then you end up not being fine in the West, that's going to get thrown back in your face quite a bit. And despite a 51-31 record, very, very good regular season mark, second best in the Western Conference, one of only two teams to win 50-plus games in the West, it all ends with some disappointment, losing in the first round in 6 games. And I think right now, Memphis is going to become better known as the team that talks a lot instead of wins a lot. Even though they've won a ton of regular season games, you could argue that, hey, they were very, very close to potentially beating the Warriors just a year ago in the postseason, when, who knows, maybe Memphis goes on and makes a run and wins an NBA title. But of course, it didn't play out that way. And along the way, they made a lot of enemies with Draymond Green, Klay Thompson. And now, obviously, they poked the bear with the Los Angeles Lakers as well. And they found themselves on the negative end on both sides of those series. But I don't want to dwell on that too much, because there are still a lot of things that we saw that were big positives, like Ja Morant's individual play this season. I do think he took another step forward as a scorer in the half court, which is really what he has progressed into and become an elite level player in that regard, as someone who can score the basketball in the half court even, which is awesome for his development. And obviously a lot of this got overshadowed by some of his off the court events that happened this year, and I don't want to draw the attention away from those things. Those things do matter. I think the Grizzlies, with holding him out of games even when it wasn't best for their team, I thought sent a decent message. Of course, just not a good look for young people who are looking up to Ja Morant, and I think he's learned that. I'm hoping he's learned that, and if not, I think Memphis is going to have to look into harsher stipulations for sure. But nonetheless, Ja Morant's a tantalizing player, an incredible talent, and I think we saw that on full display this year when he was out on the court. Triple J, what a year for him, Defensive Player of the Year, and that's really going to garner a lot of the respect and a lot of the attention from the national media and just overall fans in general. But I do think one really important part about Jaren Jackson's game this year was his aggression on offense. He became more assertive, more dominant. I believe he posted a career high in points per game this year. And there were moments when Ja Morant was out or when Desmond Bane was out that Jaren stepped up big time, either as the number 2 guy or in some cases as the number 1 option. Think about some of his games down the stretch, kind of February to March time range, where he's putting up 38 points in a game, multiple 30-plus point performances. That's something we hadn't really seen super consistently from Triple J before this season. I think that's a big step in the right direction. Now, I've had my own thoughts, my own beliefs on Jaren Jackson Jr. about his long-term stay in Memphis and what that's going to look like. I'm not going to talk about that much in this video. You'll have to stay tuned to the channel for quite a while until we get to the point where I'm starting to really leak that out, what I actually think is going to happen there. But I do think Jaren is a very good player, and I think he took a big step forward, both offensively and then defensively. His impact, obviously, is just incredible. The amount of blocks he gets, the overall impact he provides, and there's a lot of times, too, the gaudy block numbers are what really stands out. Specifically, when you pull up his numbers on Basketball Reference, you just look at the stat sheets or the box score from a certain game. That's really, it catches your eye when it's a crooked number in that column. But his intimidation around the rim, I do think he took a big step forward this year in just contesting without fouling a little bit more consistently. Now, he still had moments, right, where he's fouling at a pretty extreme rate, but I do think it was an improvement this year. And I think that if he continues to take steps forward there, we might start looking at Triple J as a full package. Desmond Bane really upped his scoring as well. It seems like a lot of players around the league up their scoring this year. I think the existence of a transition take foul rule did ultimately lend itself to more scoring, just because there's less transition plays being stopped by a give foul just at half court. So I do think a player like Desmond Bane, who does find a lot of his points in early transition and just playing without the ball in his hands, a rule like that, changing the way the game's played, changing the pace of the game, does open up more opportunities for him to put the ball in the hoop, and he did that this year. I think everyone knows what they're getting with Desmond Bane. Really, really nice three-point shooter. Really grew with the ball in his hands this year, too. I think just an overall good offensive player and a smart defensive player. Now, there's always going to be those questions about the wingspan. You see the T-Rex memes on Instagram, those kinds of things. Bane's going to have some limitations on that end, but he is a physical defender. He's got the body frame in terms of the shoulders and the width to defend. And I think he's got the brain to defend, which is really 95% of the battle at the NBA level, in my opinion. As long as you have the requisite athleticism, which Bane does, I think that he's going to always be a solid defender. I don't really see him slipping up big time there, but at the end of the day, Bane, good player. Everyone knows that. Dillon Brooks. Now, this is a big question because I don't know if anyone knows if he's a good player or not. I think the consensus around the league was, yeah, this guy's annoying as heck, but he's pretty darn good defensively specifically. But that narrative starting to wiggle a little bit, and you know how narratives are. We see something and recency bias really starts to adjust our perspective on things, and we start to take approaches of, oh, well, this guy can't do this, and well, I think there's a lot of flaws to that level of thought and that train of thinking. Dillon Brooks, he had a terrible postseason for himself. He should have shut up before he got crapped on by LeBron James, but he decided to shut up afterward, which is a not great look on social media. It's not a great look to the media after games when you're saying, no, I'm not talking today, after LeBron puts up 20 and 20. I don't want to clown Dillon Brooks too much here, but I really do think he hurt his stock. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video, because he's an impending free agent. A little bit of a spoiler. Steven Adams, Brandon Clarke, two players who I think are really important, not only just for being on the court and providing depth and front court play, but the actual style that Memphis prefers to play. I really think that their absence was so massive in this series against the Lakers, and I don't think people are going to quite understand why, because they're going to say, oh, well, Steven Adams is like their 6th best player, and Brandon Clarke might be their 7th best player, whatever number you want to rank them. I just think their impact is more important than that, because I really do believe that with those two guys out, the two best offensive rebounders for the Grizzlies, it really opened up Anthony Davis to go over and say, hey, I'm going to block as many shots as I possibly can. The whole Lakers play style and game plan, I think, shifted with the absence of Adams and Clark both, because both of them would have punished that type of defensive strategy on the glass with, runners going off the rim and put back dunks, to be honest. Adams probably put back layups and maybe put back kickouts, but still, they would have been eating on the glass offensively. And Xavier Tillman's a really nice rotational big, but he's not Steven Adams. He's not Brandon Clark. It was a massive difference in that series, and one that I don't think can be overlooked, honestly, because I do really think that series looks different. Now, I'm not saying the Lakers for sure lose. The Lakers played an awesome series, so credit to them. Tip your cap to them. Davis was awesome. LeBron was fantastic. Overall, I just think the Lakers played very, very well, but I think some of the absences that Memphis had kind of opened up some of the decisions that they made in terms of how they wanted to play against Memphis, which were all very good decisions, by the way, by Darvin Ham. Luke Kennard, or better known as Nuke Kennard, this guy can really shoot the ball. And, that's not anything crazy. That's not some high-level analysis there. It doesn't have to be with him. Every team knows it. Every scouting report says it. And if you leave him wide open, he's going to pull the trigger, and 50% of the time, it's going to go in the hoop. And you think, well, he might be really exaggerating there. Look up his three-point percentage. It's not really much of an exaggeration. Luke Kennard is fantastic for this team, and I think, him missing Game 6 obviously became a blowout, but they needed his spacing in this series. I do think Taylor Jenkins was a little too hesitant going to Kennard in favor of Brooks at points in the series. I think he should have probably done that earlier in the series and more frequently throughout the series. He didn't as much, but down the stretch of, I believe, Game 5, when the Grizzlies got a must-win when they were down 3-1 in the series, Kennard played a ton, and their team was just so much better with the spacing there, and it kind of opened up the court for Ja to do the things that Ja can do. Tyus Jones, I'm not going to spend too much time on Tyus Jones. We know what he is. Fantastic point guard who is not going to ever turn the ball over. Probably going to lead the league in assist-to-turnover ratio forever until his brother Trey Jones takes over that title, because they play the exact same way. Tyus, very good player. Perfect backup point guard to have in Memphis. Specifically with Ja Morant, you have a kind of a contrasting play style. Give you different things, and I think it's good for the overall build of the team. And then youth. I think that's one of the most underrated elements of what this Memphis team currently looks like, because they do have some young players. We saw David Roddy play in 70 games this year, and he gave them some nice stuff throughout the regular season, a little bit in the playoffs, but obviously rookies tend to get trusted a little bit less. I mean, even look at a guy like Keegan Murray, who, yes, he's had moments in this first-round series against the Warriors, but there's also been times where Mike Brown shortens the leash a little bit, and that's just how rookies are. David Roddy, I think, had a very nice rookie season for himself, averaging around 7 points a game, around 3.5 boards. Very nice year. I think the bigger storylines are around guys like Zaire Williams and Jake LaRavia. If you guys remember from last year, I wasn't super high on Jake LaRavia. Now, I do think he has a pretty clear role in this league as kind of a floor spacing four-man. But do I think that he's going to be a mainstay and a guy who's going to play 30 minutes a night? Probably not. So because of that, how reliant are you going to be on him long term? And how does your team look to continue to improve? And if you're going to rely on a guy who you invested in the last draft, you're going to hope he's good. And I think LaRavia is going to be solid, but I don't know. To me, there's something missing about him that I can't fully trust it myself personally. I know he's really young. There's a lot of time left for him to develop. This is not a death note on his career by any stretch of the imagination, but Memphis has title aspirations. And at some point, I think we've seen this kind of play out in Golden State as well, where sometimes the young guys just aren't ready to do that. And is Jake LaRavia going to be able to step up? Is David Roddy going to be able to step up? And then I think the big one, Zaire Williams. And the reason this one is so important, they moved off of Jonas Valanciunas, which is fine, but they also traded up in terms of giving up some more assets and moving up in the draft with New Orleans. And I said it on draft night after these picks happened. I thought New Orleans got the better player at 19 than who Memphis moved up to get in Zaire Williams. I thought Trey Murphy was a better prospect. I thought Trey Murphy was going to be a better NBA player than Zaire Williams. And quite frankly, that's how it looks so far. And I think, to be honest, Trey Murphy would be a fantastic addition to this Grizzlies team. In fact, when that trade happened, I kind of thought, oh, maybe the Grizzlies are interested in Trey Murphy because there was a lot of buzz around him at the time, and he was a prospect I always liked out of Virginia. And I thought, well, maybe they're making that move to go get him. And it kind of ended up working out the opposite way, where I was a little bit lower on Zaire Williams, but the Grizzlies clearly like something about him. And I don't think he's a bad prospect. I didn't even think that beforehand. I just always prefer Trey Murphy. And at some point, the Grizzlies are going to either need those young guys to take a big step forward to give them really good quality wing minutes, specifically with Brooks' impending free agency here, or they're going to have to shake some things up with the trade. And we'll talk about both options, and we'll see where we get to in this video about what the Grizzlies should or could look to do this offseason. So when it comes to the NBA draft, they do have their own pick at pick 25. They also have control of all of their future picks. Plus, they also have control of the 2024 Golden State Warriors first round pick due to the Andre Iguodala salary dump from, I believe, 2019, somewhere in that range, right? A few years ago. The Grizzlies are really well set up with their draft picks and what they could look to do on draft night in terms of trading off of pick 25, attaching future picks to maybe make some type of mega deal. They have young players like we've mentioned in Zaire Williams, Jake LaRavia, David Roddy. Teams will have interest in those players. You know, I know last segment I was pretty harsh on those guys. They're still solid players. They're still guys who I think for the most part the consensus around the league is, yeah, they could help a team throughout the course of a regular season and in spots during the postseason down the road once they're a little bit further along in their development. I don't want to come across super negative on them, but I think Memphis wants to push forward and try and win now. I don't think that they want to be a first round exit or a second round exit any longer. They want conference finals wins. This is still a team that has not won a conference finals game in the entire franchise history, to my understanding. So Memphis needs to get there at some point, and they need to win games when they get there. They have made an appearance before with Marc Gasol, but they did not win a game. They got swept. So I do think there's some internal pressure on kind of breaking that drought a little bit and turning this thing into not only a regular season powerhouse that's fun and dynamic and exciting, but also a team that can push in the postseason and make noise and host playoff games in the Western Conference Finals, and specifically probably hopefully get to the finals at some point. Because with Ja Morant, you have the head of the snake, the type of talent that could maybe get you there. It's about having the requisite pieces around that to win. And I think that this draft is going to be really important for them. There are some targets out here that I do like for them. Brandon Podziemski from Santa Clara. We saw how important Luke Kennard was. Let's get another Luke Kennard-esque player. I think Podziemski a little bit more comfortable with the ball in his hands, a little bit more athletic than Kennard, but he's very similar in terms of some of the defensive limitations as well. I do think he's going to be a good impact player at the NBA level. I think he'd be someone that Memphis would really like to have to add a little bit more wing spacing and floor spacing in general, just because the more shooting you have in this league, the better right now. So a guy like Podziemski, if he's there at 25, it seems like a no-brainer to me. But also Bryce Sensabaugh from Ohio State, very, very good triple threat player. I think the Grizzlies do need a little bit more half-court scoring punch. Sensabaugh would give that to them off the bench. Jett Howard, dynamic handle, kind of a little bit reminiscent of a Joe Ingles. Now, he's a little bit quicker, I think, than Ingles, a little bit stronger than Ingles, too, but still a player who can get to his spots as a ball handler, can manipulate a defense in the pick and roll. That's really 90% of the battle when you're evaluating a guy who's going to dribble the ball a little bit. Ryan Rupert out of the NBL, offensively very, very raw. This is a player I could definitely see the Grizzlies taking because he kind of fits some of the athletic traits that their GM Kleiman likes to take and likes to look at, especially at this range of the draft. I mean, Rupert is an exciting player, and a lot of people are really high on him for his point of attack capabilities defensively and kind of the upside there. And I completely understand it. I just don't really think he solves the issues that this team has for postseason basketball, which is why I'd probably shy away from that a little bit more. But I could understand some of the appeal specifically for the duration of a regular season. And then Leonard Miller, a player that I would also consider for Memphis just a little bit because he's lengthy, rebounds the ball, kind of fits the scheme of grit and grind. Now, I know that they don't really use that tagline as much anymore, the grit and grind Grizz. But at the end of the day, they still are kind of wired that way. They're a very gritty team. They're a team that likes to talk trash and play in that way. And they also crash the boards hard, and they box out. They do all the little things that you're supposed to do that take a little bit of effort and work. And that's one thing that you can't overlook. So a guy like Leonard Miller, who kind of plays in a similar style, definitely could help them there still too. So we get into NBA free agency here, and projected negative $6.1 million in cap space, which you might be saying, well, how do they do anything with that? It's kind of convoluted and kind of complicated on how they could make some stuff happen, but there is some pathways for them to make something happen with cap space if they wanted to go that direction, but I just don't really think they're going to. Instead, they're going to use some of the NBA exceptions that allows teams to make some signings over the cap space. One of those is the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. That's what that NTMLE stands for on the graphic. Non-taxpayer mid-level exception. That's going to be at $12.2 million annually that a player could sign this season. So we're looking at 3 years, $36.6 million type contract. Think what PJ Tucker signed last year with the 76ers. The Grizzlies could bring a player like that in to help them compete and add another dynamic player to their team, maybe a bench scoring type, or potentially just a traditional 3-and-D wing. That's typically what we see the mid-level spent on most frequently, that and backup bigs. They also do have the biannual exception there as well, but if you do go out and use one of these exceptions, you are hard capping yourself, which makes it very difficult to work out a trade, which is why I think that the Grizzlies probably don't actually go in that direction, which is, maybe surprising, and a lot of people are going to be curious as to why. We'll talk about that in just a second, but they do have Dillon Brooks heading towards unrestricted free agency, and with his bird rights, they can also still go over the cap and sign him. Now, before this postseason, I thought he was going to be in line to get something along the lines of 4 years, $70 million, which is a big-time payday, and to be honest, it's a pretty significant overpay at around $17.5 million a year. The reason a team would have been willing to do it, I'm talking about like a Houston, a Detroit, is to try and build this type of culture of, look, we care about the regular season, we care about defense, we care about playing physically, we're going to put our body on guys, and we're going to try and gut games out. And I think a lot of teams need that type of leadership, even though it can get you in trouble, like we saw with Dillon Brooks. When you poke the wrong bear, it ends up biting you and you're left for dead. That's what happened with the Grizzlies this year. But I do think Dillon Brooks, in the right environment for a team that needs some of that, I think he would really provide it. Now, does that mean that teams are still going to be willing to give him that 4 year 70? Definitely not. I think he really hurt his market. The very max I could see him getting now is 4 years 60, which is $15 million a year compared to 17.5, which throughout the duration of a 4-year contract, he's hurt himself $10 million. That's a pretty big financial setback just based on his performance in this past series. I do think it does have that big of an impact. I could see him signing for even that mid-level exception on a 4-year 48, 4-year 50. That's a pretty big drop off from where I was originally projecting him to be. But sometimes postseason basketball and that recency bias does shift not only our perspectives as fans and people who think the game in our way, but also the people who are decision makers. We've seen, ideas change and people change their mind all the time. I think Jalen Brunson is a great example of that, where the postseason before he really broke out with the Mavs, he got benched in a Game 7 for Trey Burke. Then the next year, he ends up being one of the go-to players for the Mavs and then gets paid big time in free agency. That's just how it works. That's how the league is. It's very reactionary at times, sometimes to a fault for sure. But I do think Dillon Brooks, because of that, it has hurt himself and his market this offseason, which, by the way, that could benefit Memphis if they do want to keep him. But I really wouldn't blame them if they let him go. And not because of any of these last-minute antics. It's just because of who Dillon Brooks is as a player. There's a lot of times he shot this team out of games and just kind of has made boneheaded plays offensively. For everything he does good defensively, it just feels like there's always some 1-to-1 ratio where he does something great defensively, and then the next time down he comes and takes a contested 2-point jump shot from about 19.5 feet. And it's just like, oh, you had a hand in your face, Dillon, with 12 seconds on the shot clock, and you really shot that. It's something you have to live with if you're going to have Dillon Brooks on your roster. And it's possible that Memphis is done living with that, which is why I don't think it's a guarantee that he's back. But I do think that if the price is right and they feel like it's a bargain for them, they're not going to rule that out either. So, who are some free agent targets that they could look to add in? Remember, we have that mid-level exception in there. Jay Crowder, Kevin Love, two guys that I have listed here who would be partial mid-level exceptions. I don't think either of them gets that full non-taxpayer mid-level, but with the way that the exception works in the NBA, you can split that. So $12.2 million, you split that in half, $6.1 million each annually for Jay Crowder, Kevin Love. I do think that could make some sense. Gives Memphis another guy who can rebound the ball in Love, who for the most part of his career was a fantastic rebounder. I think people forget how good Kevin Love was on the glass, specifically back in Minnesota. I think that makes some sense. He can also step out, stretch the floor, and I think he gives Memphis one thing that they could still use as well, which is a charge taker, someone who's willing to slide in, draw some charges. Now, I know that's been a hot button topic. I'm telling you right now, if you're someone who wants to ban the charge, I imagine trying to play against Giannis Antetokounmpo and you can't slide in and take charges. The guy's just going to put his head down and run through everybody. We're not playing football, we're playing basketball. You can't do that. And the charge call is part of the reason why. Now, if you want to move the charge circle out, that's a different discussion, but you can't get rid of charges. It would just be terrible for the game. It'd be terrible for the league, and Kevin Love would be less valuable. But I think he's going to maintain his value because I don't think the charge call is going to change at all this offseason. Jay Crowder, I know he's not going to be back in Milwaukee. Clearly was not happy with how the last couple of games went in that series. I know Bucks fans aren't happy about it either. And Jay Crowder looking for an opportunity to be embraced. And his run with Memphis before this team was a postseason team, I do think had some really nice positive impacts on the guys that are currently on the team. Jaren, Brooks, Morant. I think that Crowder's presence early on in their careers was a big positive to them, specifically with all the drama around Andre Iguodala. Jay Crowder brought his lunch pail to work and showed up every day and worked hard for that Grizzlies team. And I think that reminisced well with the entire team. And I think he would be welcomed back with open arms back to Memphis. Other guys I like here for varying reasons. Yuta Watanabe, he plays very well around kind of dynamic stars. We saw it with Kevin Durant. He's a fantastic corner shooter, big progression in his career from where he was a few years ago. And he's a smart defensive player. He doesn't have all the physical traits. He's not the most athletic guy in the gym, but he's smart and he understands how to rotate and step in, take charges. And really, that's such an underrated element to team basketball is if you have a guy who understands, oh, well, this guy drove here and all of a sudden we had to get into our defensive rotation. Now my assignment's the corner, or my assignment's the wing, or I got to close out to the top of the key, or I got to be a help defender on a low man. That's hugely important, something that a lot of teams around the league, specifically the teams that missed the playoffs, don't really have a lot of. And I think Watanabe would be a nice addition into Memphis's culture as well, with the way that they play defensively. Curry, obviously, for his shooting, I don't have to expand on that much. Everyone knows Seth Curry. You're getting him because he stretches the floor. O'Shea Brissett and Troy Brown Jr., actually two fun names that I don't think would cost very much to get onto the roster. We're looking at either the biannual exception for one of those two guys, or maybe even minimums, honestly. Probably a minimum for sure for Brissett, and then maybe Brown slips into that biannual exception. But either way, both of them good hustle wings who have the physical traits that you like. Brissett's been kind of a scrappy wing in his time in Indiana, and then Troy Brown Jr., I think, really revitalized his career in LA this season, and really showcased that he does have still the athletic traits that got him drafted rather high to be a solid defender in this league, which is again why Memphis would draft him or sign him, specifically if they feel like Dillon Brooks is not part of their long-term plans. You probably try and budget out some minutes at that small forward position, and I think Troy Brown Jr., O'Shea Brissett could probably help fill in some of those minutes. And then also, of course, just giving more minutes to Roddy LaRavia, and then also Zaire Williams is what you would probably fill in those minutes with. But you can see why there's some hesitancy on my end, because we don't really know which one of those three guys probably gets the bulk of those minutes. And to be honest, I don't know if any of them are perfectly clear fits as of right now. I would love for them to have more shooting. Watanabe, I think, would be awesome there. Jay Crowder would be pretty good back there too. So when we get to trade targets, you see I had two options, But one of them's crossed out because Mikal Bridges is not going to get traded this offseason unless it's in a big, and I mean really big, blockbuster type trade. Something like Karl Anthony Towns moving teams, Trae Young moving teams, something really big, okay? Talking about former All-NBA players being on the market. Memphis is not offering that. Memphis is offering a bunch of draft picks. They've got 4 draft picks that they'd be willing to trade, maybe 5 if we get to draft night. So I know 100% without a shadow of doubt that Memphis at the trade deadline offered 4 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges. I'm pretty sure that was widely reported. I 100% know that from my sourcing. And I also know that they were exploring talks with the Toronto Raptors, with Masai Ujiri, on a potential OG Anunoby trade the week of the deadline. Ultimately, nothing got done there. Toronto pivoted, went and bought Jakob Poeltl, but I think that Toronto could potentially be at a spot where they are looking for a changing of the guard. I'm going to have a Raptors offseason preview coming out on the channel at some point relatively soon, hopefully. So I'm very excited for that one because I think there's a lot to break down for their offseason. But OG Anunoby, I think, would be attainable at the right price. And I know Dillon Brooks was discussed in those trade talks as well earlier in the year. Now, it's not like they were on the 1-yard line or anything, okay? I don't think Toronto was super close to making a deal because I think that they still internally felt like they could push for the playoffs. And I think, you know, Nick Nurse probably wanted to win, and ultimately his goal was probably to save his job. And we saw that didn't play out that way. So I think that now is the time where we could see Toronto pivot, make some different decisions, and see that, hey, maybe we're not as good as we thought, and maybe we do need to make some moves, specifically with Van Vliet in free agency, Gary Trent Jr. in free agency, and to be honest, they could lose Jakob Poeltl as well. So there's a lot kind of lying on the line here in Toronto, and I think OG Anunoby, for the right price in terms of draft pick compensation, which Memphis has a lot to offer, as well as some young guys like a LaRavia, like a Roddy, like a Zaire Williams. Those are some names that I do think Toronto would be interested in recouping back in a deal, and maybe trying to get the most out of those guys long term, which does make some sense as well for me. I'm not guaranteeing anything happens here, but if there was a big trade to happen in Memphis, OG Anunoby would be the player landing with the Grizzlies. Then we go on to the early outlook, and this is really the most important part of the video because it's me stating, hey, look, I think this team is going to be blank good next season. Either very good, not good, whatever I think, right? For Memphis specifically, I still really think this team's going to be very, very good next season. I think they're going to win 50-plus games. If they upgrade properly over Dillon Brooks, they could be seen as potential title favorites and serious title contenders, even though just a week ago, or less than a week ago, they were bounced from the playoffs in the first round. Everyone likes to think that, oh, first round to the finals is such a massive gap. And yes, there is a lot of steps and hurdles in the way from being a first round exit team to a finals contending team. But it's not the 40-point difference that we saw in game 6. Okay, it's just not. It's really like 4 points a game, 6 points a game can shift you from being a team that doesn't make it to the conference finals to all of a sudden you win the finals. Think about Kawhi Leonard going from San Antonio to Toronto. The upgrade there for the Raptors from DeRozan to Kawhi was what they needed. And that's really what that big step forward was. Also moving off from Casey, going to Nurse. All of those things contributed. And if Memphis can make some of those right decisions, obviously I don't think there's going to be as clear of a decision as Kawhi out here for them. But does an upgrade to OG Anunoby, who's a little bit more reliable offensively than Dillon Brooks and gives you a lot of the same defensive versatility anyway, does that type of upgrade move the needle enough? And the answer might be yes. If Phoenix gets a little bit older, you never know with injuries, team might, maybe there's teams better than them, but a rolled ankle can change a series. There's a lot that can play out that could favor the Memphis Grizzlies next year. Now, if I had to bet and you're asking me to put all my money down on something, I'm not picking the Grizzlies to win the finals, okay? I'm probably not picking them to make the finals, but I do think, just looking at this team as a whole, their core is constant. Their 3 best players are going to be the same 3 best players they had this year when they won 51 games. There's probably not going to be any crazy John Moran off the court stuff that I know of, at least at this point. So because of that, I still feel confident saying this team's going to win 50-plus games next year. They're going to continue to improve. Hopefully some of those young guys, if they're still on the roster, take a step forward, and then you can still be confident that the Grizzlies are a good squad and they're going to be competitive next season. I feel pretty confident in saying all of those things, even if it doesn't mean I think that they're going to be my finals favorite right now. Because again, there's only one team in the league that's going to win the finals. You shouldn't base everything off of that, specifically when some series are really, really close down the stretch of games, and one or two key plays could really shift whether a team wins a series or loses one. It's just not really fair to look at it that way when basketball is a lot more than just a numbers game. This isn't baseball. This is basketball. There's a lot of things that, can shift around and change a series and change the way things play out. And sometimes do it or don't do it type players like a Jimmy Butler, I think is a great example of that, where guys turn up in certain moments and they step up big time, even when the math suggests that maybe they won't, or you wouldn't expect them to. Sometimes it just happens that way. And I think that Memphis, if they get the right run of things, they could be in that conversation as a team to really make some serious noise. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, turn that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more uploads. And just a huge thank you to you guys. Really do appreciate each and every one of you stopping in here, leaving a like on the video, and then just let me know in the comment section what video you'd like to see next, or your thoughts on the Grizzlies and this offseason preview. Again, if you did think this video was fairly accurate and in depth, I would love if you guys hit that subscribe button. It lets me know I'm doing a good job here. But I hope you did enjoy, and if you did, again, smash that like button. We'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.